So what we have here is another community member panel session. We have Peter Hopkins from Bond University, Amelia Rowe from RMIT University, and Mel Hunt from the National Library of Australia, our next presenters, with what is described as a truly collaborative story for publishing Alma digital records to the ANBD. So I'll hand it over to you.
Okay.
And I can see your screen.
Excellent. We're all good. And I can see my notes, so that's even better. So publishing Alma digital records to the Australian National Bibliographic Database. Just before I kick off, the presenters, we acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands where we work and live, which are quite spread out across Australia. We pay respect to their elders, past and present, for their wisdom, teaching and cultural knowledge. Come on, slide, move along. Oops. Okay, first of all, Stacey has already introduced us, and no doubt a good number of you have already seen Amelia and I earlier in the sessions today. Mel is from the National Library of Australia, and she's been the person we've been working with most recently with the from Trove Collaborative Services. Okay, try and proceed to my next slide. That's better. Okay, so in this presentation, we'll cover the collaborative work that we've undertaken within the ANZREG community, and we'll describe how our community action started, describe the problem we had to solve, and then we'll talk about the solutions. Now, I won't go into a lot of detail about Trove because I'm sure in this forum, I'm having trouble moving my slides on, unfortunately.
Does it want you to click the play button?
It doesn't want me to play on Zoom with it. Okay, so Trove, as the ANZREG community knows, is a key mechanism for connecting researchers with unique Australian resources and the holdings of Australian cultural institutions. And behind Trove, the Australian National Bibliographic Database is one repository of metadata. Alma is equipped with a publishing profile customised for contributing MARC records to the ANBD. The profile was developed years ago and has not been updated to support digital inventory. Bond University started using Alma Digital in 2018. We were actively seeking improvements from the beginning, including display of rights information and Creative Commons licenses in the Alma viewer and open access indications in Primo. We were fortunate to get some traction with key figures in Ex Libris through the idea exchange and through our support cases, and that helped us in getting the right people in the conversation when the time came. In late 2019, Bond wanted to start contributing digital resources records and needed to work around the profile's limitations or get it changed. As some of you will recall, I put out the call to our mailing list and asked what others were doing and if there was an interest in collaborating to request a change to the publishing profile. Librarians from RMIT, University of the Sunshine Coast, University of Western Australia, University of South Australia, Macquarie and Monash universities expressed interest in participating, or at least in hearing the outcomes of this effort, and a series of web meetings were organised with Ex Libris and with representatives from the National Library of Australia to find a way forward. Bond and RMIT went on to undertake testing the proposed solution with Trove Collaborative Services. Come on, slide. Okay, we acknowledge the testing done by Lucy Camel from the University of Western Australia. Lucy had been experimenting with the general publishing profile and normalisation rules to do the job. Key problem that she identified was that the general profile did not support the file naming convention for the ANBD record update service, and this entailed manual interventions to get the records loaded. None of us were interested in such a manual process becoming the accepted procedure. These meetings were crucial in getting us to a point where we could see the potential benefits of using a general publishing profile rather than have Ex Libris re-engineer the custom profile, and that the Trove team knew enough about Alma's capabilities to suggest that we should consider using OAI PMH instead of FTP'd records. and that's where the file naming problem became surmountable. It also set us up for a streamlined process that requires minimal or no normalisation rules at the Alma institution. So our goals were a solution that would work for all Australian Alma libraries and have minimal customisation required at those libraries. So Amelia will now continue our story.
Thank you, Peter. While Peter gets the next slide moving, I can get going. So what I'm going to share with you is some of what we learned in setting up the general publishing profile and some of the key things you might want to consider when using it yourselves. So when it came to setup and testing, RMIT went first, simply because we have a premium sandbox. So we were able to test things like updating records, making changes to them, deleting them without impacting our production data. And then Bond University followed on behind us using their production data and instance. The first thing you want to think about when, I guess, sharing your records, your Alma digital records, is actually the records themselves. So the first thing that we had to consider was, with sharing Alma digital records, was, are we sharing Dublin core records? Are we sharing MARC records? Are we sharing both? And we did have quite a few conversations about it, or quite a long conversation about it, and we ended up deciding to start with the MARC records. And the main reason to start with MARC records was that Trove advised that they would have a different process for harvesting and, I guess, dealing with Dublin core records than MARC records. So we decided to start with the MARC ones. The next thing that we wanted to consider was what national standard we needed to meet. So we looked at the Australian National E-Deposit Scheme, and just to make sure that our records, I guess, were up to scratch for sharing into such a large community initiative. And then when it came to record quality, obviously based off of those standards, we were really worried that we'd have to make a whole lot of record tweaks and changes. But luckily Trove actually agreed to make a lot of the changes for us. So things like adding in your NUC, so your National Union Catalogue Code, into your holdings information, instead of having to, for us to have to individually as each library add that into our holdings, which we don't want on a daily basis, we'd only be adding it for them. They agreed to make those changes while they ingested after harvesting the records and while processing them into their system. So Mel might touch on that a little bit more. And even with Trove making a number of those edits for us, there were a few changes we wanted to make to, I guess, adhere to a best practice. So at RMIT, we did edit our rights statements so that, to make sure we had some consistency across collections, and also to align the wording with the National E-Deposit standards. And Bond University made similar changes, and they also wanted to make sure they could make use of the long-awaited rights information display in the Alma viewer, which was introduced with the June release. And finally, the biggest thing you need to think about when preparing your records is the set of records. So to your publishing profile, you need to associate a set. So you need to decide what records you're going to put into that set. So what do you want to send? How will you identify them? Does the National Catalogue want to receive them? So some good things to think about are what's unique, what's special to you. At both Bond and RMIT, we chose to go for unique and open access content. So for RMIT, an example of the sorts of material we've shared, you can see an image of our Catalyst newsletter. So that's the RMIT student newspaper, and that goes back to 1946. So for us, when we were creating our set, we just looked at the collection IDs because we were sending all records from a collection. When Bond came to share their materials, so they had some newly digitized publications, photographs from the university's archival collection, and again, they also had a student newsletter, and they also had several discontinued journals produced by the university that had recently been migrated from the institutional repository. And the search set that Bond used when creating their search set, or their set of records, was the access rule policy name equals open access. So there's different ways you can create your set. I did also want to add, so this is some new information that we didn't share when we did our IGLU presentation, is that the way the OAI feed handles suppressed records was something that after going live we realized was a little bit problematic, and we had some cases back and forth with Ex Libris about it. And our recommendation to the community when creating your set, based on what we've learned, and I'll talk a little bit more about it later, was to add in tag suppressed equals no to your search set, so that you can make sure that any suppressed records don't get shared via the OAI. And another thing that, while Bond and RMIT haven't used it because it doesn't suit our current workflows for Alma digital material, but might suit you, is when you're creating a search set, whether or not you want to use the tag sync national catalogue flag, because that's the sort of flag that we're currently using for print material and sending that to Libraries Australia. Next slide, please. And then once you've done all the nitty-gritty stuff with the records themselves, then you can get to the technical stuff of the general publishing profile. And lucky for you, Peta's done all the hard work, and she's shared 2 publishing profiles to the Community Publishing Profiles tab. So when you go into your publishing profiles, and instead of being in your institution tab, click the community one, and you can search for Libraries Australia Digital Dublin Core or Libraries Australia Digital MARC. And you can copy that to your institution zone, and most of the settings you're going to want to publish digital records will already be set up for you. Obviously, you'll need to change your set and maybe the set spec and the name. But there's also a few other things you might want to think about. So in data enrichment, you might want to look at whether or not you want to create a normalization set to run on the records before sharing with Trove. Now, because Trove are doing some corrections for us, like adding that NUC symbol, neither Bond nor RMIT saw the need to add a normalization rule, but depending on the state of your records, you might choose to add a normalization rule. And I also wanted to share with you what the linked data enrichment does. And so if you look on the slide, just down the bottom, there's a snippet of what that looks like. So if you click, or it should be already ticked, is the link data enrichment option, and that adds in the URI to your 650 fields, so to your subject fields. And while we don't have an immediate use for linked data, we never know what the future will hold. So starting to get used to including that in material where we can makes it more possible that we can do something with it in the future. When you get to your digital enrichment section of the general publishing profile, just be aware if you've got local and remote digital representations. So for example, at RMIT, we have local Alma digital resources, but we also have links to our Rosetta instance in our Alma digital. So we wanted to capture both of them. So there's just a couple of tick boxes there where you want to make sure you tick both boxes, and that will make sure that you capture the delivery URLs, thumbnails, public notes, and all that representation information for both types of Alma digital resources. And then the final hurdle we had to look at was our OAI access. So once we started testing, we found out that your OAI has to be set either to be open to everyone, or it has to be restricted by IP range. And you can't restrict it by set, it's an institution level setting. At RMIT, we've currently chosen to restrict our OAI to specific IP ranges, and that's simply because we've been using our OAI with a lot of our Alma Rosetta setup. So in order to keep some of those Rosetta records restricted, we've restricted our OAI, and that meant we had to add Trove's IP address to our allowed IP range. At Bond University, however, they actually chose to keep their OAI open, so they didn't need to do any additional work. So you can go either way, and it works either way. Next slide, please. So the next slide, when it does pop up, it's just to give you a quick example of what the publishing profile looks like. So you can put some of what I've said into a visual. And the next one. Yep, so this gives you sort of a look of what that digital inventory enrichment area of the publishing profile looks like. And the next slide, we're jumping through them real quick now. The next slide will, when it comes up, be an example of the OAI feed. So for people who haven't seen what an OAI looks like before, this is what it looks like. And the next slide has highlighted what the collection enrichment, so that's one of the options you can tick, looks like, and also what that digital inventory enrichment looks like. So whether or not you tick that tick box for what to include it, that's what it's adding in. That's the extra metadata that it pops in automatically for you, and that's mostly drawn from your representation information. And I believe I hand off to Mel now.
You do indeed. Thanks, Amelia and Peter. So now that we've heard from you guys exactly how you've made your Alma digital metadata available to the National Library via the publishing profile, let's take a look at how that metadata is picked up, how it's transformed, and how it's shared automatically to the ANBD and in Trove. For those of you that don't know, Trove is Australia's free online research portal. It's a collaboration between the National Library and hundreds of partners around Australia. So from earlier this year, March 2020, the Trove Collaborative Services team started trialling a new way to update data on the Australian National Bibliographic Database, which we call the ANBD, and Trove. It's called the OAI PMH Daily Update, and it was a pilot project. The aim was to try to automatically update two of our main services, the ANBD and Trove, with data straight from partner catalogues or collection systems on a daily basis, without human intervention. So this brings a lot of benefits to our partners. System librarians will no longer need to spend time exporting and manipulating MARC files from local catalogues. With the OAI PMH Daily Update, the records are exchanged machine to machine from the partner catalogue straight to the ANBD and Trove. Global data refreshes are no longer necessary because the systems stay in sync on a daily or nightly basis. And this eliminates the need for weekly, monthly or quarterly routine maintenance tasks and big projects every few years to refresh holdings data in the ANBD and Trove. With the new service, partner holdings will always be up to date within 24 hours. The added benefit for us of working with partners using specific systems like Alma Digital is that we've been able to create a single metadata transformation process which will work for all Alma Digital partners interested in partnering and sharing data to the ANBD and to Trove. So as we said before, Peta and Amelia have done all the hard work to make Alma Digital compatible with this metadata harvesting protocol, and they can advise other Alma Digital users how to configure their publishing profile and produce their OAI PMH feed. Together, we've tested this new integration, so we're hoping there will be minimal setup every time when other Alma Digital partners want to start using OAI PMH daily updates. If you're interested in contributing your collection to Trove or finding out more about the update pilot, you can watch our Take 20 with Trove webinar or read our online guide about data contributions to Trove, or just contact the Trove Collaborative Services team and we'll tell you what you need to know. So let's just quickly take a look at the workflow, starting from when the metadata is made available to our harvester. So you can see here on this slide, this is a screenshot of the harvests from RMIT and Bond for both their collections as we see it, as it comes to us through the NLA harvester. And that's what the records look like once the harvester's picked up this information and applied the transformation steps that we've created to craft the metadata so it best meets our requirements and looks as best it can and have an optimal display in the ANBD and Trove. So I won't go into too much detail here, but the changes that we've made include things like making sure the metadata for thumbnail links and links to the digital item in the repository, information about rights and copyright data, and holding statements and NUCs are all included. And we do that using a combination of XSLT style sheets, regular expressions, and processing steps in our harvester to make those transformations on our end. Once the harvest is set, the harvest runs daily and the records are automatically picked up and transformed by the harvester and pushed directly to the NBD in Trove. Each day, the harvester checks the OAI PMH feeds for newly added, changed or deleted records and pushes any of those changes through. So we will now go to the next slide. Thanks, Peta. And that is what the records will look like in the ANBD, or Libraries Australia. And then on to the next slide. And this is what the records look like in Trove. That's it. That's the end of the metadata journey to get the records shared. So I think we'll head back to Amelia for a few additional comments.
Yep, thank you, Mel. So this is an additional slide that we've added following our Igloo presentation, and having been live sharing our records on this regular basis and getting the harvest reports on a regular basis with Trove. And these are some of the things we've sort of had to nut out as we went. So the first thing is about suppressed records. So we found out that, so there's a tick box in the Bibliographic Enrichment tab that says, I think, records, published records, suppressed records as deleted. Now, our assumption was that what that tick box would do is publish the records with a header of deleted, so treat it like a deleted record. Actually, what that does is it adds a leader position 6D, which says that the record's deleted, and it doesn't publish any holdings. But it wasn't quite the behavior we were expecting. So if you want your records to publish into the OAI, your suppressed records to publish into the OAI as deleted in the header, so like a proper actually I am gone record, don't exist anymore, you want to make sure you add that tag suppressed equals no to your search set, like I mentioned earlier. Obviously, if you're actually deleting records, which is the next point, if you do remove a record from your set, so like excluding it because it's tag suppressed equals no, it does publish as deleted, which is really good to know. And if you delete records from the system, and this is only something we've tested in the sandbox because we haven't come across an instance and need to do this yet. But if you do delete a record, it does publish with deleted in the header. But if you do that, you need to remember that the ANBD is set up as a bibliographic database for sharing records, and it's actually not designed to handle deletes. So they will remove your holdings, but if you want to delete records, the best thing to do is actually to contact Trove about it. And the other fun thing that Peta discovered for us, accidentally of course, is that if you republish your set of records, it's basically a restart. Everything has a new publish date and things like that. And Trove is highly likely to pick them up a second time or to treat them as new records. So if you need to republish all your records because you've changed your sets and everything's completely different or something like that, again, best to start by contacting Trove. And I think, Peta, did you have any final remarks?
Yeah, so our final slide. Oh dear, it's gone completely blank. That's not very helpful, is it? Let me try that again. I'll carry on with what I was going to say anyway. Our goals were met and the bonus was improved timeliness with daily updates instead of weekly record contributions. Where do we go from here? Well, publishing more records via OAI, that's where. It is early days, but testing if the daily update can replace the Libraries Australia profile for physical and electronic holdings is on the agenda for Bond. With physical holdings having greater volatility in terms of withdrawing holdings and potentially more updates to bib records needed, we need to be assured that the updates and deletes are handled well with this method, and this rests in two places at the moment. The National Library and Trove Collaborative Services is processing the learnings from this pilot of the OAI PMH daily updates and implications of the method for bib records in ANBD. And as Amelia mentioned, Bond and RMIT had submitted cases to Ex Libris to confirm the expected behaviour about that suppression of publishing of suppressed records, basically. So at least we have some better information there now. RMIT also wants to explore publishing Explorer records and is interested in publishing Dublin Core records to Trove as well. This presentation has focused on MARC records, but sites may have a combination of MARC and Dublin Core records, as we do at Bond. We have started contributing Dublin Core records as well. The Dublin Core records are loaded into Trove. They are not loaded into the ANBD. So this variation will also have some implications that sites will need to understand for their metadata management practices. And if you want the gory details of how to do these things, we actually have published 2 community knowledge articles, which I'll put the links into the chat in just a moment. So one of them is for how to publish MARC records, and the other one is for how to publish the Dublin Core records. And I will put that into the chat, and we've got 4 minutes if people have some questions.
We don't have any questions there right now, but I certainly wanted to say that I love when people say phrases like somebody has done the hard work already. And then, although I don't know if, the initial work of is certainly not without human intervention, because you have done all of this human aspect, haven't you, right now, so that then the rest of us can follow along after you in your footsteps very gratefully. We don't actually have Alma Digital ourselves, but I wonder if there's anyone else out there in the community that would be really interested in this sort of the work that you've done here. And thank you so much for sharing the profiles as well. It's great that Alma functionality supports us in knowledge sharing within our system as well.
It was one of the things actually that Ex Libris, when we met with them early on back in that, I guess, community collaboration phase of this project, was actually having a meeting with Ex Libris. I think it was Eb Carter's from the NLA at the time, and a number of others. And Ex Libris actually walked through what the possibilities were and introduced us to the general publishing profile, which back when a lot of Australian libraries were going live with Alma didn't exist.
Yeah.
So the reason none of us had ever looked at it for publishing to Libraries Australia is that we'd never had to, because Ex Libris had created this specialist one for us. And as soon as they showed it to us and mentioned that it had OAI capabilities, I think Eb just dived on it, because she's like, the NLA is doing a project to move to OAI at the moment. And it was perfect timing, really.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I saw Eb's name on one of the slides earlier for the pilot study, I think, that Mel mentioned. Yeah, no, it's great that we've got so many people, so many experts and so many sites all working together. So I agree with your initial bio that it's a collaborative story we have happening here, which is just really great. And Susan's put a comment in into the Q&A that she'd love to, Susan's in implementation at JCU. So she's probably a sponge at the moment and would love to hear more about your experiences of Alma Digital in general. We probably don't have enough time. We've got 1 minute left, and that sounds like a whole, like, almost 2-hour workshop, doesn't it? So maybe you guys can have a chat with Susan.
Maybe that might be a good topic for a webinar in the new sometime.
Yeah, definitely, like for our program coordination next year, perhaps. Yeah. Okay, well, thank you very much to all 3 of you for that. That was excellent. And thank you for all the work that you've done to build that. It's amazing. Okay, so we're now officially in the final stretch, and I again have very little to do, because basically I'll just hand over to Kate to do our closing session. I think I saw her coming on. Over to you, Kate.
Thanks, Stacey. I actually, during that last presentation, I had a slight taste of Australia. I could hear some exotic birds in the background. I'm not sure if it was coming from Peter or Mel, but it reminded me of our conference at Bond last year. The very obnoxious birds kept me awake a lot, and I was complaining to everybody, but it was really nice to hear them. It just gave me a feeling I was somewhere exciting, not in my office in Dunedin. Anyway, so our first online conference is drawing to an end, and I just want to make a few closing remarks before we wrap up. We've packed a lot into the day. It really has been quite an amazing day, starting with Nancy's keynote on linked data. And I particularly like the thought that she shared with us, the world enriched with library data and libraries enriched with the world's data. I actually took a photo of that. I thought that was quite cool. We were really fortunate to have Ex Libris staff sharing their future strategies and priorities. It's always good to have them participate in our event. It was also great to hear that our community is seen as adventurous and innovative, and often the early adopters of new products. That's a great reputation to have for any community. So well done, ANZREG. Itai provided a valuable demonstration of the new Alma UI and the metadata editor, and so good to see so many questions and a high level of engagement from the audience. And hopefully that eased the pain of his 5 a.m. start. He really did draw the short straw of all the presenters today. And then just to mention all of our presenters, once again, we have such a high caliber of presenters at these conferences. There's some really impressive knowledge and expertise within this community. And I just want to touch on a little bit on those people who spent the time preparing and sharing. The panel presentation on Esploro, for me personally, provided a great insight into Esploro from some brave early adopters. And the peek at the live environments really reinforced my desire to push for Esploro at my institution. And I was fielding a couple of direct emails from other Otago attendees going, we really need to get Esploro. So thank you to the panel there. We also had a really strong finish at the end with Keel showcasing some exciting integration within Primo VE. And then that final panel, Peta, Amelia and Mel, on contributing to the Australian National Bibliographic Database. Amelia, that's the first time I've seen an OA feed, and yeah, I'm definitely in the right job. I don't think I could, that's not my level of expertise, but fascinating to hear what's happening there. And definitely I think there could be some real interest in, or is some real interest in following up with a webinar next year. So it's been excellent. It's far surpassed my expectations. As I said, I was nervous about how this was going to go. I think for me, the real challenge is when you're presenting or talking, you really do appreciate an audience. It's very hard when you're just talking to a picture of yourself on a screen. It makes me realise how important that face-to-face engagement is. You get energy, you get feedback just through body language from an audience sitting in front of you. So to all the presenters, you did really, really well engaging in this online environment. We've really got to get back to face-to-face. As I mentioned earlier, our biggest attendance ever, with the largest number of probably new conference attendees, so that's fantastic. Thanks to our presenters. Our conferences obviously rely on presenters. We can't do it without you. Thanks to the committee doing the moderating and keeping us all on time. Perfect timekeeping. Just, yeah, absolutely great. And dealing with the chat and the Q&A. We were all kind of learning as we went along. We've got some follow-up responses to some Q&A questions, which we will post on the ANZREG list probably tomorrow, unless one of the committee wants to do it tonight. The New Zealanders are starting to fade because it's getting to the later stage of the day. So just one more plug for our post-conference surveys, which we will be sending out. Provide us with your feedback and any ideas and topics for 2021. So I just want to wish everybody best of luck for whatever the remainder of 2020 throws at us. It's been quite a weird year. Just, I think, be thankful that we're not in the Northern Hemisphere at the moment, where things are looking pretty awful over there. So I hope everyone's heading into a restful end of the year and a chance to recharge batteries for the new year. So I hope to see you all in 2021 somewhere, either online or miraculously face to face. So thank you everybody, and great conference.